And anybody couldn't just come up and talk to God, because he's holy. And therefore he said, nobody must touch my holy mountain. So Moses sensibly erected a fence around the bottom, because you could just walk up to it. There are some people there, and you could just walk up and touch the mountain. But God was going to communicate to them his utter holiness. He said, Moses can come up, Aaron can come up, but none of you must even touch my mountain. But now God says, having given Moses the 10 Commandments up here, in the middle of lightning and thunder and fire, awesome sight, God says, I want to come down and live in the camp with you. But if I do, it must be a tent that communicates my holiness. A tent that you must treat respectably, that you must treat with awe. A holy place. In fact, right in the middle of the tent will be the room where I actually live, and that will be the Holy of Holies. And so God gave them specifications for his tent. You had a glimpse of it earlier, but let's look at it again. It had to be right in the middle of the camp, and all the other tents had to be arranged around it in a special order, which we'll come to later. And immediately around it were the priests and the Levites, so that they were between the ordinary people and the holy place. And the tent itself had to be fenced off with only one entrance. And then God's tent was inside, but that had 2 rooms, and the inner room was God's room. And into that, only once a year, one man could go. Nobody else, ever. And the whole tent is just full of detail. Let's look at some quick pictures of it. The beauty of it must be breathtaking, yet most of the beauty was hidden. Beautifully embroidered curtains and coverings, and yet they were all covered with a badger skin outer thing that would hide the beauty from the people. All they would see would be this rough outer skin, only knowing that inside were golden pieces of furniture and beautiful curtains embroidered with heavenly colors. There was blue, the color of heaven. There was red, the color of blood. Silver and gold. It was a magnificent tent with this high fence around it that you couldn't see over, so that in a sense it was hidden. There was a mystery attached to it. And here you see some of the priests at the outer veil. Then there was another inner veil before the Holy of Holies. Well, let's go inside and sort of see inside. Here you have the outer room, the kind of vestibule, the anteroom of God's palace, if you like. And here there were the table of the showbread, the 7-branch candlestick, another little altar. In fact, let's go back to the other one. You see, if you wanted, even the priests approaching God had to come to an altar first and offer a sacrifice, kill an animal and burn it. Then they moved on to a great big basin to wash themselves clean. The whole thing is saying, if you're going to come to God, you'll have to have a sacrifice first, and then you'll need to be clean. It's full of meaning, this, isn't it? In fact, God said, this is a copy of where I live in heaven. This is just a replica of the real thing. So there's the anteroom, and finally in the Holy of Holies, one piece of furniture of shittim wood covered with gold. The mercy seat. The cherubs. Inside some manna. They never saw it. Even when this tent was dismantled and moved somewhere else, this was covered up. And the tent had to be carried by special people. And the ordinary people had to keep 1,000 paces away from it until it was erected again. The first thing, erect God's temple, tent, then you could put your own up at the proper place around it. It all spoke of God's holiness, and yet it also spoke of a holy God who was willing to live in the midst of his people. Amazing. We have perhaps lost something of the awe and the reverence that is needed with a holy God. We've got too pally with him. We need to remember he's holy. The high priest, even the clothes of the priest were specified. They had to be right. And the high priest wore on his chest the 12 jewels which represented the 12 tribes whom he was a priest for. And those 12 jewels crop up again in the last page of the Bible in the New Jerusalem. Well, we could spend hours on this, but you'll have to read other books. It's full of meaning, full of symbolism. God says only special people can use this, priests, and only special people can build it. And that's when he gave them these incredible skills. You'd have thought all that would really bring home to the people God's utter holiness. But while Moses was up the mountain, you know what happened. Aaron stayed down this time. And the people came to Aaron and said, Moses is a long time up there. I don't think he's coming back. We want a God down here. And so Aaron said, give me your gold. And they gave gold. And Aaron told Moses later, I put it all in a melting pot, and out came this. I mean, if you're going to have an excuse, you can think of a better one than that. But that's what he had the bare face to say to Moses. I just put the gold in, and look what came out. Now, of course, that photograph is of an Egyptian god. I told you about the bulls and the calves, a symbol of fertility. And the bull is a very common symbol. I'm told there's a golden bull like that outside the European Stock Exchange in Frankfurt-on-Main. It's a symbol of wealth and fertility, prosperity. And this came out, said Aaron. And because idolatry leads to immorality, because the loss of respect for God leads to the loss of respect for people, they had a wild orgy. Well, you know the story. It's a sordid bit. And when Moses came down and saw what was going on, he broke both copies of the law and smashed them. He was only symbolizing what they were doing. They'd smashed it already. And he said, how could you do this? And then he went back up the mountain. He said, God, I'm fed up with them. And God said, so am I. And God said, I think I'm going to finish with them. I think I'll try someone else. And that's when Moses reached the height of his career, I think. He took the form of a priest then, and he said, God, if you're going to blot them out of your book, blot me out. I don't want to be the only one. And God replied, I only blot out of my book the names of those who sin against me. And you haven't. And that thought is taken up all through the rest of the Bible. When David sinned with Bathsheba, he said, God, don't blot my name out of your book, please. And in the last book of the Bible, Jesus promises, he who overcomes, I will not blot out his name from my book. The most important thing in life is to keep your name in the book of life, believe me. God says, I blot out of my book those who sin against me. It's a tragic story. And when Moses insisted that the people were punished, do you know how many died? 3,000. Now I want you to bear in mind that the law was given on Sinai on the 50th day after the Passover lamb was killed. Just let me put this together for you. The Passover lamb is killed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. On the 3rd day after that, they are liberated. On the 50th day after that, the day they called Pentecost, they were given the law, and 3,000 people died through breaking it. Now, does that put something together for you? Isn't it amazing? The pattern of the old and the new. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. On that same 50th day, centuries later, when the Jews were celebrating the giving of the law, God gave his Spirit, and 3,000 people get saved.